So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Denise Keele with the Michigan Climate Action Network. And Denise is a forester and an SAF member, and I love to feature our Michigan SAF members and the wide variety of jobs that they have. A little bit of trivia before Denise takes over here. How many people have gone whitewater rafting before? Awesome, a whole bunch of you. How many people just had a blast with your whitewater rafting guide and thought they were one of the craziest, wildest dirt bags you've ever spent a day with? Anyone? Anyone? I love whitewater rafting guides. One time I was in Utah and this girl said, "Hey, you look like a river guide." And I wasn't sure if that was the biggest insult I'd ever had in my life or the biggest compliment I've ever had in my life. But Denise, when she was a forester down in Tennessee, was a professional river guide. And I think that's a pretty sweet fact. And she also happens to own a cottage on the Little Manistee River, which is the best river to paddle in the Lower Peninsula. So Denise is now a canoeing buddy on my favorite river. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Denise Keele, and I'm assuming you're going to cover this with, my can. But another reason why I'm excited to have Denise here is that the Michigan Climate Action Network is a network of 150 other organizations. So here we have a member of Michigan SAF who has a huge influence in a huge network. And one of my goals for SAF is not only that we are a professional society that's welcoming for rural, urban, economic, ecological, and everything in between, but is also a society that is a professional society that has influence upon society. And our last speaker of the day is a policymaker. And we as a society need to find ways to have greater influence on society and on policy. And I'm going to shut up and let Denise take it away.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Mike. I was giving a press conference on the state capitol steps, and no one shows up sometimes for those things. And there was this guy that really was into my whole talk, and it turned out it was Mike Small because he had read my bio, right? And it saw that forester piece on there and said, "I gotta come meet this person. What's going on?" And now I'm back in Michigan Society of American Foresters after a pretty long gap. I might win if there's a pin for lapse in membership, I probably win it. So I'll give the shortest version of my many lives, and the one that I'm trying to lead now with all of you. So I grew up on a farm in Western Iowa. And I was the weird one because at about 7 or 8 years old, I read a book about how there used to be trees in Iowa before my family farm took it all over. And I got obsessed with Arbor Day and planting trees. And so I did not go to Iowa State to learn how to grow better soybeans, much to my family's chagrin. I went to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville to learn how to grow trees. And yeah, so hey, go Vols. So I did that, and I did get out with my degree in forestry and took a position with the Tennessee Division of Forestry. And within about 3 months, the first prescription that I ever wrote on a forest, I got sued. Right? Yeah, and I was like, what's that about? Because I really had taken all of the science and all of those pieces, right? And my boss, I think, felt a little sorry for me at the time. Like I could tell I was just shocked about this. He said, why don't you go spend some time in Nashville? This is pre-internet, how old I actually am. And why don't you follow those folks and see if they're talking about any forestry issues that we need to know about, the reams of paper pre-internet that you would do the bills on. And I said, these people have no idea about forestry or the actual science and art of growing trees, yet they're making decisions every darn day without that expertise. And so then I made the move to the dark side of policy, right? And got out of the woods and went to SUNY ESF to get a PhD. I have 3 degrees in forestry, and I'm not a forester anymore. It's a crazy thing, right? So I went to go get my PhD at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, studying forest policy. And what I studied was how folks were using the courts, right? And so I studied litigation and how that whole bearing of public interest groups really do influence our systems, right? So then I became an academic and I took a job at Western Michigan University down in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I was there for about 17 years, teaching environmental law and policy in a political science and joint environmental studies and science program. And I found myself having a great time writing those papers and doing those things. But one of the reasons I first started studying forestry and not wildlife like our prior colleague, which I probably would have done, was back in the day, I was like, well, trees, at least they don't move. It was too hard to study wildlife. I thought, the trees aren't moving. I know I can go back to the same tree. I can remeasure it every time. There was a certainty about it that I really loved. And when I really started getting into climate policy and climate change as a young academic, I realized the trees were moving. And that was a big watershed moment for me. And a lot of my own research and teaching became about that. I founded at Western Michigan University our climate change working group, faculty and students coming together from all disciplines. How are we going to tackle this piece? And then I founded a Kalamazoo grassroots group in 2019. And about 2,000 people came to the event that we hosted. And I look back now at that event and I think, oh, that's when I first really became an advocate and didn't know it. And I since have left my tenured position at the university. You can call that crazy or stupid or brave or courageous, so whichever one you like. And in June of 2022, I took over for the Michigan Climate Action Network as its executive director. And then you know how I got back here.
Denise, I screwed up. Keep going.
Uh-oh, he screwed up. That's all right. We're gonna keep going.
Keep going. I turned off the videos. Didn't have to
Oh,
turn
they
it
can't
off.
see me. Hi, everybody.
Now, rock on.
That's all right. You're making us look at our necks anyway, so. Stamp, now my goodness. So who's the Michigan Climate Action Network? So as Mike said a little bit, we are a network. So we are 150 groups across the state that are all working together. We're about 40,000 individuals, give or take 100,000 or so on social media. So we have a large and powerful network and voice. And my mission now is to amplify those voices, connect those organizations, and to support all the folks out there. It was interesting at lunch, I got to have some good conversations. And if you don't know, you are the majority, okay? 77% of Michiganders believe in climate change. 66% are concerned about it. There's a very, very vocal minority of around 10% that are in the climate denial category. They're just a lot louder than our movement. Except for me, right? That's why I'm here, to be loud and proud and bold about where we need to go with our climate action. The other thing I want to point out in our mission is that, yes, we're demanding the urgent and the bold solutions, but also the equitable solutions. And when you work in the climate advocacy or interest group space around environmental politics, that equitable piece and that bold and urgent piece are often actually at loggerheads. My talk today it's on the program as how to talk to an environmentalist, and you saw my real title is why climate justice advocates should love foresters. Because you are truly on the equitable and bold and urgent side with all of us. Because you're thinking about the values of ecology and the communities and the places. Many of my colleagues in the clean energy space really only think about the bold and urgent, not where we should put that solar, just that we need solar now. That's the difference, okay? And how you're going to talk to more folks like me and how I'm hopefully going to convince you to do more work with folks like me is that we really are going to hone in on that justice, that equity piece, because that's where the ecological consciousness that I know all of you have, that's part of what we mean by climate justice. Taking that place-based approach and understanding where we are and who's affected by it is what foresters do. If I remember some of my training, right? Keeping forests for the long term that's our #1 goal. Right? That is also what your climate justice advocates want to see out there. So we're going to have a lot of good ways that we can talk together, and I hope and think actually work together. I'm going to forget a million things, but you're going to ask me questions. It'll be all right. So a little bit about, what we're doing there, right? That majority passing those laws. So this is going to be a bit of a policy talk, and we are going to bring up dun, 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 Gaylord and solar. Okay, I'm just going to get there. All right. So I want to talk just a little bit about from the advocacy community that I am in now and how that I think really relates and resonates to the forestry community, how we think about that relationship between land use, right, and climate change, how what we call in the advocacy community nature-based solutions. We just had a great example of that from Plaster Creek. And then what policies from the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan to the 2023 Climate and Energy and Jobs Act. So the first reason why climate justice advocates should love foresters and that you should be talking to them about all the time, on the left of the screen is global greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see the sectors that produce those, right? Electricity, industry, transportation. But of course, there's that agriculture, forestry, and other land use. Those land use practices globally are contributing to 24% of our global greenhouse gas emissions. This is a huge global issue. But if you look at the pie chart on the right, that's the United States greenhouse gas emissions by sector. You still see commercial and industry and electric power and transportation and agriculture, but what don't you see? You don't see forestry on there and you don't see that land use change. Indeed, it's even better than that, my friends. It's not that you're not even contributing to climate change, you're a net total sink. In the US, the net carbon dioxide equivalent right now removed by just forestry is about 13%. We love you. Hopefully you're gonna love me back by the end of this, right? In Michigan, the song remains the same. The top left is the pie chart of Michigan's overall greenhouse gas emissions, very, very similar to the US overall. Of course, if you really want to parse out how we're different globally, transportation is the big category that we increase in the US and that we increase in Michigan. And out of that, then you can get to these kinds of charts about where are the net sources. And so this is a net source chart of those sinks over time. And you can see, right, when we're talking about land use, how we get to those kind of figures even in Michigan. So that's cropland remaining. Cropland is still emitting some pieces, right? When we convert land to urban areas, when we convert any land, right, we're tilling that soil, right? And so we'll know that that's releasing carbon. But as we go down the other side of what's our sinks, it's preserving those wetlands, right? Keeping lands as wetlands, converting land to forest. And if you can't read it, guess what that big giant purple bar down there is? Forest land remaining forest land contributes to about a 10% overall sink for Michigan's carbon dioxide emissions. So again, we love you foresters. A nature-based solution really is any just action. So when you're out there talking to climate justice folks, you're like, where should I start? Start with that you, right, are sequestering carbon. You are contributing to that net sink, and that you are offering up what we call nature-based solutions. I'm so grateful the colleagues from Plaster Creek got to go before me because that's an exact example of this, right? We're addressing a challenge. And that might mean converting wetlands back. It might mean flooding control. It might mean, Jesse Lincoln, we heard the whole piece about fire. It might be bringing that fire and prescribed fire back. And of course, it's gonna be keeping forests as forests and hopefully planting a lot more trees. These have a wide range of benefits that I know you're all familiar with because I learned the three-legged stool too, right? We're thinking about economics, we're thinking about livelihoods, we're thinking about ecology, right? But we want things that benefit both nature and people. Those solutions, again, this is at the global scale though, of course, are going to decrease greenhouse gas emissions. They're going to capture and store that carbon, and they're going to enhance the resilience of our ecosystems. This is from the IUCN. This is really the beginnings of where the 30 by 30 came from many, many years ago. That if we were to contribute at least 30% nature-based solutions to address climate change, that we would deliver emissions reductions of 5 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalents, and that we would save a pile of money in doing so, right? The trifecta. The bad news, nature-based solutions are not a panacea. I wish we could just plant trees. I might still be a forester if we could just plant trees and get ourselves to address climate change. We're gonna need all those trees, but they can't be a substitute for stopping the use of fossil fuels. Many of you probably learned, like I did, the old bathtub analogy, and I think it still makes a lot of sense. If you came home one day and your bathtub was on and it was totally overflowing, what's the first thing that you would do? You'd turn the tap off, right? You wouldn't start bringing rags to mop up the mess before you did that. And a lot of what we're doing with some of the other technological fixes that aren't nature-based solutions, like carbon capture or other pieces, right, that are technological, we're coming in to mop up after, right? So this is in no way to say that we shouldn't also deal with the energy transition. And we should always be thinking about nature-based solutions, again, from a biodiversity standpoint and from the idea of full inclusion of our communities, right? When I go back to Michigan SAF values or the forestry profession values, they're exactly the same, right? And that's my next piece. I know this slide is hard to read, but I want you to see the little booklet from our climate justice folks that talks about the exact same principles of, we should have conversations with folks. We should be communicating. We should be thinking about the place-based benefits, and we should be thinking about the traditional knowledge and uses. Climate justice is an ecological approach. And that is where I think you will find a lot of common ground with many of the advocates that I work with. They are going to see that you literally are the Lorax speaking for the trees. And that is exactly what they will appreciate because they are also underrepresented and marginalized. It's all the same philosophy. So let's talk about some of these policies and some of the effects and how we can really think about bringing our land use and our forestry and the advocacy community that I'm working with together. And I know you're all familiar with the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan. Who am I going to see in a couple of weeks at that conference, maybe? All right, just a couple of you, or just our state folks? Okay. So in 2020, Governor Whitmer issued to our Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy Department a My Healthy Climate Plan. It includes all those sectors I just talked about, right? A lot of my work is in the electricity sector or the transportation sector. It's a real pleasure to be coming and talking about the nature-based solution sector, right? There is a section in that plan that deals with this. And its strategy is built on that same worldwide strategy of, well, we better conserve 30%. If we did at least that, we would be capturing some of those natural benefits, sequestering that carbon, improving our recreational and our access, improving biodiversity. And the last point that it says, and this one's important, even though it's covered by the Zoom bar, that's okay, is really important because I'm hearing it in policy discussions now all the time. This line about we should avoid any land use conversions that cause a net increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Right? Any land conversions cause a net increase. That's what's really being held on to. And we're going to come back to that phrase. So we've got the Michigan Healthy Climate. That sounds great, right? We want to do all those things. I got to be at the DNR's Michigan the Beautiful Summit, October of 2023. Well, how are we doing on that goal? And protected lands here are really only the public land, so total protected land. And this does not include all of our private land and our private land foresters out there. We're at, about 25% totally protected. We only need to get to 30, great. But if you talk to a climate justice advocate and you look at that map, what are you going to say? Matters where it is, right? We do really absolutely need to increase our access in these urban areas because you all know that in itself is the nature-based solution we're talking about outside of Grand Rapids and Detroit. Think about what a lot of trees can do to reduce not just the carbon emissions, but the heat islands, the air quality pieces that are going on. Those, we really absolutely need that. Again, the climate justice advocates are going to love you when you come and say, this is how we do this around and in your community. Because we have to get more of those pieces. So that's going, I would say, okay. And then in Michigan in 2023, in the fall of 2023, we passed the Clean Energy and Jobs Act. And it's really surreal to be here after this terrible storm and to have driven up from Kalamazoo and see the devastation and to hear the speaker before me talking about how this ice storm will change this profession. Because it was an ice storm in the spring of 2023 that instead of hitting all of our trees, hit urban Detroit and hit the south of Michigan. And it knocked out power lines, but for more people, right? Knocked out that power for weeks on end. And it was the impetus for this law. There's no doubt in my mind that that moment in time of those ice storms in the March and April of 2023 led to the passage of this act. And I hope that we're able to use the devastation that we all see today in our forests to the same effect. So if you're not too familiar with the Clean Energy and Jobs Act, it requires our investor-owned utilities to produce 60% renewable energy by 2035 and 100% clean energy by 2040. And the definition of renewables and clean energy is there on the left. So it includes a lot of things that a lot of my colleagues and advocates don't like, but it's a great start. It requires the Michigan Public Service Commission to think about climate and health and equity and affordability when we're thinking about energy. Increases Michigan's ability to do rooftop solar, which is a whole other issue. But it's that last one down there, siting for large-scale solar and wind projects, that it also includes. Because at the end of the day, again, renewable energy and this transition will be a land use decision. And as you well know, land use decisions are pretty darn controversial. And when you get in those communities and start talking to folks, can be a lot of conflict. And this law was meant to preempt some of that. Frankly, we were already seeing before this law was passed in 2023, we were seeing many, many townships and different localities across the state pass very restrictive renewable energy ordinances. Things like a wind tower needs to be 1,000 feet from any structure. But my propane tank only needs to be 50 feet. That's interesting, right? We're seeing just a lot of these pieces, and that's what scared, frankly, remember those folks on just the urgent and bold side? It scared a lot of the advocates that I work with, and they said, we're never gonna be able to cite all this stuff, Denise, if we don't have state control as the ultimate authority to do so. It still includes local community discussions, it still includes that input, and you can now go to the state level, though, if your project or your township has one of these restrictive ordinances. I don't love this as a climate justice person, right? I want our communities to know and to be involved and to decide and not have to punt this to our state level. But that's where we are because my bold and urgent folks said, Denise, we just got to do it. We want to make sure that we're equitable and just as well, right? And that we're really taking in every community's, including the natural world's position. So that's where we get to our debate, because where should it be cited, right? And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I put it in here because as foresters, I think you'll appreciate that we first have to know where the resource exists, right? Where are our wind and our solar resources? We have pretty spotty wind, some in the UP and some of that it's hard to see. It's the more darker purple color is really what you need in order to have wind. But we have a great solar resource all over Michigan, despite, yes, the clouds come and the sun does set. We got plenty of solar resource. So when it comes to this renewable energy siting, when we break down the numbers and the math, to do all of the renewable energy, if we just did solar and wind, we need about 209,000 acres to meet the goals of the Clean Energy and Jobs Act. And that sounds like a lot to other audiences, but I know you guys know how to do acres and hectare math. The current amount that we have devoted to solar and wind is about 17,000 acres. And really overall, we're talking about a land use change of just 0.5% in Michigan. But we're looking for big acreage, right? At least the utilities are, for utility scale. 500 to 900 acres, often taking lots of different landowners to take those parcels, to put it together, to be big enough for those large scale utility projects, and we're gonna need those. We're gonna need some large utility scale pieces in there, as well as some smaller community ones. Let's talk about our private land for just a minute. When we think about that, we need 209,000 acres. Let's put it into a little context. Private land is currently 2.5 million acres in corn production in Michigan. 750,000 acres of that corn production is dedicated to producing ethanol. So I only need a third of the land we're currently using in ethanol to place all the solar and wind that Michigan ever needed. The smaller solar farms are looking at about 10 acres or so in order to really make those viable. And the justice position is that land should never, though, only be exclusively used for especially solar. I wish Charles Gould was here. He did a great study with us, and there's a lot of good research on these pieces. And for my university colleagues out there, please continue studying the benefits of how we plant under solar panels, what we can do with the multi-use of those pieces. Because when we do biodiversity habitat under that, or small grazing, or some crops, it's increasing our ecological values. The numbers are astounding. And Charles led a study out of MSU for 5 states in the Midwest to really hone in on that. And it's kind of the only good one I have right now. So I need some more university folks about how we make this actually work. And then there's public land siting. Now, let me start with public land is different than private land, as well it should be, right? We have acts and laws and constitutions and the National Resource Environmental Protection Act here in this state, right? That tell us how we should be managing our public lands. And those are for protection and conservation and access. DNR is, of course, the largest landowner in the state at 4.6 million acres of public land supposed to benefit all Michiganders. And I just screenshotted this from the website. So what's the policy? And the thoughtful approach to solar development is going to be careful planning and a commitment to limiting the negative impacts. You can read it. And to date, the DNR has evaluated about 30,000 acres for potential solar development, and most have been found incompatible. That's probably the good news. That should be in force. Sites that are selected are going to be carefully vetted. But you all know that then this controversy erupted over 420 acres outside Gaylord, where I'll be on that tour tomorrow with all of you to go and talk about that specific piece. But when we're talking about public land, again, we're talking about a whole different thing, right? This has different values for it. And from the, again, environmental justice perspective, this is also about access to public land. Those communities are very upset when they see public land being utilized or part of a corporate and business approach, right? They get very, very upset at that. So they're going to be, I think, with most of our rank and file foresters here. So I want to start to close here with some of the things that I think we agree on. I think we agree that climate change is impacting forest ecology, and we're going to need renewable energy deployed, a lot of it immediately. I think we also agreed that Michigan should keep forests as forests to maintain our carbon sink. And in fact, we should be expanding forests to urban areas. Deforestation contradicts what we said we would do in the 30 by 30 in the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan. And what I hope can continue is some decision-making about best practices. When and how should we think about our public lands, if at all, for solar? And if that's a marginal piece of land, then why is it marginal, right? The goals of our public lands are to restore that land first and foremost. And if we don't restore it, we're leasing it, well, we could just sell that then if it's not gonna be for us. The other piece that I have to bring up there, we have several relationships with the sovereign nations that also coexist in Michigan. And this is, of course, in many areas, ceded territory. And I don't see anyone right now really talking about the usufructuary rights of Native Americans in Michigan before we make these kinds of decisions about public lands. My non-industrial private landowners and you industrial foresters out there who get to work with the private sector, that public education has got to continue. We need you out there really talking to private forest owners so that A, they don't convert this, right? But moreover, so that they can continue to understand the little bit of land that we do need for solar, the kinds of lands that might be actually viable to do that, because those forest owners are neighbors to a lot of those smaller farmlands that really could benefit from leasing their land from solar. But there's a lot of fear out there. And so my contention to you is that you are the experts, and we need more of you out there talking about these issues. And if you want to come help me, I need some volunteer leaders. We work with, because of my background, right, you can hopefully tell that I grew up in a very, very different way. We work very closely with also the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum, and we're in a partnership together. We have developed a whole little guidebook about Michigan's renewable energy to use in more rural areas to talk to folks about all of the things that I just said, what it means to go solar, where we should do that. But I really think that we need our conservation specialists, our foresters out there helping us make these land use decisions. What do we really mean by marginal land where solar should go? I think I want some experts like all of you weighing in on those kinds of decisions. And then we got to talk about these things. I know, such a downer. I think that one way out of all this from the climate justice advocate perspective is we really need to think about, for public lands, why our public lands are in the energy business at all. And to be really, really crystal clear on that position, folks like me are going to ask you to be shutting down those oil and gas wells if we're serious about a healthy climate, folks. Right? That is coming. So we might disagree on a few of those things. And we might disagree about a little carbon offsetting, as we just heard, right? Our position would be that there's one atmosphere, and we don't want to have to do that to our forests. Now, I know that that gets us into some pretty thorny funding problems at our DNR level, and I'm happy to talk about those afterwards. So I really hope that coming back to my forestry roots today has helped convince you that there are climate justice advocates that know and love and appreciate all of the things that you are doing as foresters, and know that I need your voices too. Your voices in how and when and why we should ever convert any land will be incredibly valuable to me to make the case that forests should stay forests on the bottom, and that when we do put solar, it shouldn't just be for that one land use. So I hope that today we can start to work together a little bit more. And because I'm probably a little controversial, I'm going to remind you of SAF's meeting values. And I hope that we can continue again to make this profession better. I will be your best advocate out there to help you with sustainable forestry, what that means to the public, if you want to help me make sure forests stay forests. And I think you might. Thank you very much for having me.
Denise, I have a quick question. Sure. Why does it say keep forests as forests rather than keep forests managed forests?
Oh,
Why do we not advocate for long-term management and active management of the forest rather than just say keep forests as forests? Because a lot of folks on your side tend to look at it as a very static environment that want it left alone.
yeah. Right there. Excellent point. I'm changing that today, moving forward. Manage forests, right? It's not just in the preservation category at all. And thank you for that. That's exactly the kind of thing that we can do.
I too have a question for you before I go.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. I know. I hold this all day. Do you know of any like financial assistance potential for like businesses or institutions that may want to have solar development on their current infrastructure? Because a lot of it probably isn't able to handle that kind of development, but the level of impervious surfaces that exist, like I'm in the mental camp that I'd rather see solar panels on like every school and church and mall and
Me too.
building before we even consider forested spaces to put these in. But
Yeah.
is there any like funding source to assist those spaces to do that type of work?
So many that you're gonna have to call me. Literally, and this is a fantastic question, because this is why I think I really want you out there, if you're able at all, to come give a talk with me in some of the more rural communities in particular, because that's the number one question I get asked. Denise, put it on those rooftops and those parking lots. You darn right. You darn right, we need that. There is currently, the way that our utility structure and our net metering works, there's currently a huge disincentive to that. That's why the other important point in the clean energy laws of 2023, that cap I talked about, we increased it from 1% to 10%. That's the amount of rooftop solar that the utilities will currently allow to be redistributed in this state. We would like to eliminate that cap so that everyone does exactly what you're saying and puts it on those parking lots and on those rooftops. I hope you could come be advocates with me for that, because that's how we save more land from any conversion whatsoever, is we do that. But folks aren't doing that because it's illegal. So the number one issue we work on the positive side is what's called community-owned solar, for exactly that reason. And then there is a lot of good money and resources out there for you to do this, especially if you're thinking about schools. I can probably get you an electric school bus in like a year. We can get solar panels on your school in about 3 years right now. That whole space is really moving. There's a whole lot of special educational grants for that. But if you're a business owner, your own, offices, absolutely, there's a ton of money out of there. You just won't be getting any benefits on your utility bill from it because of the current law, which is why a lot of folks don't do it. But it's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Yep.
Just have a quick question. On average, how much does a solar farm cost?
How much does a solar farm cost
Yeah.
to build one of these? I don't actually know that. I know it takes about 3 years and that they're leasing that piece out, but I don't know. On now I got something to look up. Yeah, we know $600 acres to plant red pine, I learned today.
So,
Oh, over here.
so there was a recent solar project that went in northeastern upper peninsula, lower Michigan in Prescott County.
Yeah.
And I was familiar with that area because I worked as conservationist with a lot of the farmers that had this land. I know the land very well. That was some of the most productive farmland anywhere in the area. When you go through there today, and there's about maybe 600-700 acres just of solar panels.
Yeah.
Why are we doing that?
Yeah.
I just want to know that, what's the long-term benefit of putting solar on some of the most productive farmland there? Not to mention
Yeah.
all of the Amish community had moved into the area. They're surrounded by solar panels now.
Yeah.
Why are we doing it?
Well, when we say we, let's talk about who's we. So if you're talking about private land, so if we're talking about private land, private landowner, just like the decisions to not thin that forest, and now all those trees are wiped out by what I would call a climate change event, right?
You don't get that.
That's
Some kind of federal dollars that are supporting
so they are then so
solar out on that private land, because you can't
Yeah.
offer these private landowners that much money for that land. I know some of the farmers.
I do too.
property.
I know. So that's a
I think
leasing.
it's a very short-term kind of decision.
Yeah.
Considering
Yeah.
benefits of that land.
Yeah.
We need to be thinking about this, not only for farmland.
We do.
but also for forest.
We absolutely do. And so those are private land decisions. They are making a leasing decision, usually for finances, really, right? So if we think about a lot of our family farms, I grew up in that model, right? Are having a tough time making it. We leased our land for billboards was what you did when I was growing up, right? And so I see the same thing. It's a financial decision. It's a private landowner decision. Come help me, come be part of that, because we are trying to be out there in those communities and saying, where is the right place for solar and how do we support? everyone. And I'm probably going, I see the yank them off the stage movement here. Thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you.
I know some of what I said was probably controversial, but I am here to be your ally and your advocate. I'm glad to be back in forestry community.
Here for happy hour dinner?
There's no one here to me. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, we got a break now too.
Denise is here for happy hour and dinner, so we get to talk all night long and tomorrow on the tour. So y'all have earned another break. Tara Ball wanted me to remind you that sign in for your 7 CFEs, continuing forestry education credit, that can be used for the certified forester, the candidate certified forester, the new urban and community forestry credential, and forest technician credentials. So those CFEs are very useful. And this is your last chance to sign up for a tour tomorrow. So please sign up for a tour. We got a 25-minute break. Come back at 3:30. Yeah. Oh, and take Raju's survey. Go take the survey on carbon and prices.